The 1993 FIA Formula One World Championship season kicked off with a total of 28 competitors registered for the South African Grand Prix at Kyalami, although the withdrawal of the March team meant that 26 cars appeared on the circuit for the opening race of the year. In the Williams camp, former test driver Damon Hill was promoted into the full-time race team alongside Alain Prost, returning after a year's sabbatical. Tyrrell, now with Yamaha engines, had Japanese driver Ukyo Katayama paired with Italy's Andrea De Cesares. Michael Schumacher remained as Benetton's star runner, with Riccardo Patrese moving across from Williams as his partner. Former IndyCar champion Michael Andretti joined Ayrton Senna in the McLaren lineup, now using Cosworth Ford engines in place of Japanese Honda units. The footwork team had Derek Warwick returning after a 2-year absence driving sports cars, paired alongside Japan's Aguri Suzuki, while Italian Alessandro Zanardi joined Britain's Johnny Herbert in the Lotus lineup. The Jordan team switched to using the new Breinhart V10 engine with Brazilian rising star Rubens Barrichello, partnered by former Ferrari driver Ivan Capelli. The Larousse team had an all-French driver lineup with Philippe Alliot and Eric Thomas on their driving strength. The all-new Scuderia Italia Lola Ferraris were driven by Michele Alboreto and Formula 3000 champion Luca Badowa. Christian Fittipaldi stayed in the Minardi lineup, now joined by former Indy Rookie of the Year Fabrizio Barbazza. The Ligier team opted for an all-British driver lineup with Martin Brundle and Mark Blundell handling its Renault engine cars. Ferrari retained the services of Jean Alesi, with Gerhard Berger returning to the Maranello fold after a 3-year stint with McLaren. Finally, the all-new Swiss Sauber team arrived on the scene with Austria's Karl Wendlinger and Finland's JJ Lehto on its driving strength. From a technical standpoint, there had been several key changes for the 1993 season. Tyres were narrower than before, and restrictions on front and rear wing dimensions were introduced in an effort to reduce downforce with a view to intensifying the quality of the racing. A tantalising air of uncertainty surrounded the opening race of the 1993 season in South Africa. Although Ayrton Senna's overalls were ready for duty, it was uncertain whether the man himself would be there to fill them. At the end of the day, he did indeed take to the track at the wheel of the McLaren MP48, which had shown so much promise in pre-race testing. The ever-confident Ron Dennis expounded the McLaren team's strategy for 1993.
Contractual issues have become of secondary importance, and I'm quite optimistic that as the year unfolds you will see some very interesting tactics and strategies employed to hopefully win the World Championship.
Alain Prost strolled back into the Formula One fray, now taking over as new Williams team leader in place of Nigel Mansell. Firmly strapped into the cockpit of the new Williams FW15C, Alain quickly proved that it wouldn't take him long to get back in the groove. Meanwhile, Damon Hill had everything to smile about. The former Williams test driver had been promoted to the full-time Williams race team. Michael Schumacher, meanwhile, had high hopes for his Benetton Ford package, and Jean Alesi stepped confidently out of his hotel, anxious to do battle in the new Ferrari F93A. JJ Lehto waiting for his first run in the new Sauber, while Michael Andretti swapped notes with Mika Hakkinen. Brazilian new boy Rubens Barrichello listened intently to advice from Ayrton Senna, while Johnny Herbert pondered Lotus's latest two-wheel Challenger, perhaps wondering if it might be better than his regular 107B. So no real surprises there, with Prost and Senna lining up on the front row of the grid, but Blunder was deservedly happy with his 8th spot. And they're off. Well, not quite all of them, of course. At the start of the race, Hill found himself second behind Senna, going through the first S-bend. But in the excitement of the moment, spun wildly, his gyrating Williams just being missed by Prost's sister car. Andretti's Formula One debut ended after a late start, his McLaren now transformed into a tricycle following heavy contact with Derek Warwick's footwork. Prost settled down in third place from the start before moving decisively ahead of Schumacher's Benetton to take second place going into the S-bend beyond the pits. Hill found himself in trouble again, this time with Zanardi, forcing him out of the race. With typical determination, Senna proved unbending under pressure, twice sitting it out with Prost at the same point on the circuit. But his perseverance paid off. Eventually, at the third serious try, Prost got alongside the McLaren a fraction earlier, and the deed was done. Schumacher then also overtook Senna, but Ayrton was destined to get back ahead of the German driver after the routine tyre stops. As the Benetton mechanics were still hammering on the wheels, Senna was already putting the hammer down. Prost reeled off the remaining laps firmly in command, but when Schumacher went to overtake Senna for second place again, the Brazilian made sure that there was hardly enough room available and Schumacher spun. Not a happy boy.
Somebody has to go to Roland Bunserite to this guy and tell him what he's doing. I mean, it's not right from my point. In go-kart you get disqualified everywhere. If you do this, you get disqualified.
All in all, it was a bad day for Benetton, with Schumacher's teammate Riccardo Patrese also spinning off into a sand trap. And as a spectacular thunderstorm doused the Kyalami circuit, Prost ran out an unchallenged winner in his first race for Williams, taking things carefully in the closing stages. Those dire conditions saw Derek Warwick crashing on the very last lap, losing a championship point on his return to Formula One. While Prost was singing in the rain, Christian Fittipaldi and his father Wilson also celebrated a fine fourth place for Minardi. And it's just like old times, with Prost and Senna at each other's throat, and Blundell no doubt very happy with his third, with Sauber scoring points on their debut. Brazil may be the land of the samba, but for the highly motivated Grand Prix fraternity, a bicycle race around Sao Paulo's daunting Interlagos circuit seemed an ideal way to limber up for the second round of the championship. Sauber driver JJ Leto emerged the winner, and hoped that his luck would hold for the rest of the weekend. For Williams, seen here flexing their muscles, the race held out hopes of a second successive victory for Alain Prost, who displayed his usual calmly confident style out on the circuit. Damon Hill wanted to try for pole, perhaps covering his ears to Frank Williams' insistence that second would be good enough, and that was what the Englishman duly delivered once he was out on the track. Yet the devoted Brazilian crowd had eyes only for the home hero, Ayrton Senna, eyeing the practice times with as much defiance as he can muster from his cockpit. The Ferrari team mechanics took time off to practice wheel changing, but to judge by the pensive looks on the faces of Jean Alesi and Gerhard Berger, the possibility of actually getting as far as a tyre stop in the race was much on their mind. Berger, in particular, was probably reflecting on a brain-rattling shunt he'd suffered on Friday. The car was badly damaged, but thankfully he walked away. Michael Schumacher's Benetton had a busy time in qualifying with a beautiful double spin, but he enjoyed it so much he tried a single one later on. Zanardi went autocrossing with his Lotus, and jumping on the off-road bandwagon, Andretti also spun onto the wet, grassy infield. Ivan Capelli enjoying himself there, and seeing as this would be his last outing for the Jordan team, he'd soon have a lot more time to play with his water pistol. So there we have Williams hogging the front row of the grid and the local boy in third. Samba drums in the crowd set the tone of the race morning, with a capacity crowd jamming the grandstands opposite the pits. Prost got away cleanly at the start, with Senna following through in second place. But Andretti was out of luck again, with a spectacular mishap. Wow! As the American pulled across to the right of the starting grid, he became entangled with Berger's Ferrari, and the two cars cartwheeled into the right-hand runoff area. Prost began to pull away comfortably, in blissful ignorance of this accident, while Martin Brundle walked unhurt from the wreckage of his Ligier after colliding with Barbazza's spun Minardi. Hill wiped the smile off of local faces as he artfully slipped in front of Senna. Barrichello also walked home early after abandoning his Jordan out on the circuit. Meanwhile, the leaders were threatened by the onset of rain, which turned the starting area into a skating rink, with Aguri Suzuki's footwork bouncing off the pit wall to end up in the middle of the circuit like a beached whale. Prost missed a tyre stop for reasons far too complicated to bore you with here, and decided to stay out for an extra lap, only to collect Christian Fittipaldi's spinning Minardi at the height of the downpour. That drama left Hill leading Senna, but after an early switch to dry tyres, Senna's skill in the wet proved too much for Hill, and the crowd went wild. Damon was left to finish second, with Schumacher getting the better of Johnny Herbert's Lotus in a wheel-to-wheel battle to take third place at the checkered flag. It was Senna's second victory in the Brazilian Grand Prix, and one which he embraced with as much emotion as the crowd. Imagine what they'd have been like if he'd have lost. He was congratulated on the rostrum by the legendary Argentinian five-times champion Juan Manuel Fangio. Clearly, he derived as much satisfaction from this acknowledgement as he had from winning the race itself. So, a popular win for Senna, but Hill must have been just as excited by his first real taste of success. For the first race of the European season, Formula One made its long-awaited return to Donington Park, the Parkland Road circuit near Derby, which had played host to the epic all-German confrontations between the Mercedes-Benz and Auto Union Silver Arrows back in 1937 and 38. Held over an Easter weekend when, disappointingly, the predictably unpredictable British weather assumed its all-too-familiar holiday mood. Not that this was a problem for Ayrton Senna, but while he hoped for rain, Alain Prost simply closed his ears and hoped that his prayers for a dry race would be answered. JJ Leto seemed happy, whatever the weather, but the first day of qualifying served as an all-too-accurate preview of what was to follow. While Michael Schumacher could run back to the pits, his Benetton, slightly the worse for wear, needed a tow. Damon Hill got a push, but de Cesaris's Tyrrell was more firmly buried, and Martin Brundle took a wildly unscheduled trip into the gravel with his Ligier. Belgium's Thierry Boutsen returned to Formula One in place of Capelli in the Jordan squad. Benetton brought their new B193B Challenger along for the first time for Schumacher and Patrese, as did Footwork with the new FA14s for Warwick and Suzuki. Senna continued to pray for rain, but dry conditions prevailed for Saturday's qualifying. Even so, Alesi managed to take an unexpected excursion across the sand trip at Redgate Corner after snagging his right foot beneath his Ferrari's brake pedal. All in all, it wasn't looking too good for the famous Italian team, with both Berger and Alesi looking pretty gloomy about their prospects. Michael Andretti had his father, Mario, the 1978 world champion, on hand to offer the odd helpful word of advice, like try to keep the car pointing in one direction. In the dry conditions, Prost and Hill asserted their usual advantage in the Williams-Renaults and buttoned up the front row between them. But with Senna and Schumacher side by side on the second row, anything could happen come the race. Andretti's dad was no doubt proud that Michael had managed to qualify 6th for only his 3rd Grand Prix. Wet and cold race day weather didn't deter either King Hussein or Princess Diana, together with the Princes William and Edward, from turning out on the grid, while the Sega girls looked on, shivering. If Michael Schumacher looked uneasy, it was perhaps because he knew his new Benetton would be at a disadvantage in the wet, as it lacked the latest anti-wheel spin traction control system. Happily for McLaren, they had that crucial accessory. But Ayrton Senna was their real secret weapon, as his dynamic opening lap so dramatically demonstrated. Despite Schumacher's efforts to ease him out on the run down to Redgate, he sliced inside the Benetton at the first corner. Then he picked off Wendlinger Sauber to take 3rd place on the outside as they plunged down the Craner curves. And there's Andretti picking off Wendlinger even more decisively. Next on the bill was Hill's 2nd place Williams, which succumbed at the top of the hill. Senna was now right up onto Prost's tail as they came through the S-bend onto the new loop. Hard under braking for the hairpin, Senna thrust through into the lead, driving as if the track surface was bone dry. Williams were all at sea with their chassis settings, and both drivers complained of poor grip, even allowing for the conditions. Hill comes in for one of many tyre stops and gets going cleanly. Then Mark Blundell's Ligier falls foul of the treacherous surface. A dejected Berger retires his Ferrari, followed by an even more dejected Schumacher. Prost brings his Williams into the pits and, to his agonising and very public embarrassment, stalls the engine. An eternity seems to pass before it fires up again, and the delay costs Alain all chance of regaining 2nd place from teammate Hill. And there he goes. Remember, Alain, mirror, signal, manoeuvre. Still everybody's human, as Alessandro Zanardi reminds us as he spins his Lotus, a move duplicated by Christian Fittipaldi, who drops his Minardi out of the high-speed queue for a little bit of impromptu grass mowing. None of this touches Senna, of course. The Brazilian continues to assert his wet weather supremacy with magical assurance, calmly taking in his stride the fact that the pit weren't ready for him. McLaren boss Ron Dennis looks puzzled, but when your car's in the lead, who cares? In the closing stages of the race, Prost's embarrassment was heightened when he was lapped by Hill. For Rubens Barrichello, a possible brilliant third place was washed away when his Jordan stopped with loss of fuel pressure a few laps from the checkered flag. For his senior countryman, the European Grand Prix was his second win out of the 3 races of the season so far, enhancing his lead in the Drivers' World Championship. Ayrton could hardly conceal that delight as he joined a similarly delighted circuit owner, Tom Wheatcroft, on the victory podium.
And there it is, the Sega Cup. And
so the weather working in favour of Senna, and Hill happy to be up there again in second place. After that dank day at Donington Park, the Formula One circus moved into the heartland of Italian motor racing, the San Marino Grand Prix at Imola, where the Carabinieri stalked the pit lane. Ayrton Senna took a back seat for once, arriving on a motorcycle pillion after an overnight flight from Brazil. He had been hoping, in vain, that the team would have the latest air valve specification Ford V8 engine, as used by Benetton. As things transpired, it wasn't engines he had to worry about. First, Ayrton spun into the wall at the right-hander before the pits. The car was repaired, and he later duplicated the move against the barrier at the Acqua Minerale corner. A glitch in the McLaren's active suspension system was to blame. Prost also had his problems, being savaged by Alesi's Ferrari, a collision which drove the Ferrari president into a state of animated despair. Michael Schumacher locked up his Benetton's wheels, ruining a precious set of carefully stenciled qualifying tyres. While Michael Andretti could at least claim that Senna had set the running when he too spun his McLaren into the pit wall in first qualifying. Prost took pole and confidently discussed things with his race engineer David Brown. Damon Hill lent an ear to Frank Williams' advice as Prost accelerated out to set the pace. And over at Lotus, Johnny Herbert and Alessandro Zanardi got down to work in tandem. So the power of the Williams Renaults putting Prost and Hill nearly 2 seconds clear of Schumacher in third. The passionately enthusiastic crowd offered its customary support to the Ferrari drivers before the start, and Jean Alesi settled into the cockpit hoping that he might live up to those emotional expectations. The track was damp at the start, but Hill got away cleanly into an immediate lead. Prost held second as the pack streamed through the long Tamburello left-hander before Senna got by, and in the background, Marc Blundell pirouetted his Ligier into retirement against the retaining wall. Senna tried to take the lead from Hill going into the Tosa hairpin on the opening lap, but Damon kept the door closed and Senna slid wide as a result. At the tail of the field, Patrese spun his Benetton into retirement as the tail-enders negotiated the exit of the Tosa hairpin, while Hill was lucky to hang on to his lead after straight-lining the Acqua Minerale chicane midway round the opening lap. Prost settled down to chase Senna for second place, but Ayrton wasn't about to be pressured into giving way and kept his McLaren in all the wrong places at all the right times. Senna then switched onto slicks as the track dried out, but got badly boxed in behind Hill coming out of the Tosa corner. Prost instantly saw his chance and leapfrogged past them both to take the lead. Senna immediately overtook Hill for second, signalling his displeasure with a wave of derision. Hill's race came to a premature end when he got offline on the wet track surface under braking for the Tosa hairpin and slid into the sand trap. Andretti was by now embroiled in a close fight with Carl Wendlinger's Sauber. He got too close to the Austrian under braking for the Variante Alta and spun wildly onto the wet grass. Remember Donington, Michael? That was Andretti out again. Senna then retired from second place with hydraulic problems, so the McLaren team could start packing up for the journey home. Alessi and Berger were also out by now, so the Ferrari fans, brutally disappointed, headed for the gate. In the closing stages, Alessandro Zanardi put on this vivid display of pyrotechnics after cracking his Lotus's gearbox casing, which prompted a fire caused by leaking oil. No such problems handicapped Prost, who continued to win his second victory of the season, evening up the score with Senna, despite grappling with a partially sticking throttle in the closing stages of the race. And it was a great result for Ligier driver Martin Brundle, who took his first points of the season with a strong drive to third place. And after 4 races, this is how the championship looks, with Senna unexpectedly in the lead. The Circuito de Catalunya, close to Barcelona, was the next venue on the World Championship trail. Yet the intensity of Formula One competition still left many of the top drivers with enough time to work on their handicap. The Williams camp, however, were working on a handicap of a different type altogether.
Sitting on a washing machine. Everywhere.
Despite these handling difficulties, Prost knuckled down to the challenge of qualifying to produce what was, in the estimation of his team, the best pole position of his season. He did that despite an uncharacteristic spin at the first corner. Hill kept out of trouble to qualify in second place. While Schumacher had a lucky escape with this high-speed, low-altitude flight across one of the sand traps with his Benetton Ford. Michael Andretti yet again made his critics wonder whether he was out of his depth in Formula One with another spin in practice. But he wasn't the only one with his hands full. Karl Wendlinger, dressing for action, fervently hoped that Andretti would keep away from him on this occasion. Viva España! Hill lined up with a great sense of expectation on the front row of the grid. And he beat Prost to the draw as the pack sprinted for the first corner. Senna strained every sinew to try and split the Williams duo going into the first right-hander, but had to settle for third place behind Hill and Prost. Further back, Wendlinger's Sauber was involved in wheel-to-wheel action with Alessandro Zanardi's Lotus. The Italian came off second best from this confrontation, shaving the grass as he was elbowed aside by his rival. After 10 laps, Prost neatly slipstreamed past Hill on the start-finish straight to take over at the head of the pack, and Damon fell in dutifully behind. Martin Brundle's Ligier was wheel-to-wheel with Suzuki's footwork under braking for the first corner when the Ligier suffered a rear tyre deflation and exited stage left in undignified style. Jean Alesi's Ferrari erupted in a spectacular cloud of oil smoke to round off his aspirations for yet another weekend. Then Hill, who had been relentlessly shadowing Prost and looked set to overtake, suffered an abrupt engine failure and coasted into the pits, leaving Alain with an easy run to victory. Damon consoled himself with a few sympathetic words from his wife, Georgie. Benetton, meanwhile, signalled to Schumacher to step up the chase of Senna's McLaren, which was now in second place. Schumacher responded to the challenge, but the ominous puff of smoke on the distant horizon heralded a major engine failure for Zanardi's Lotus, just as the Benetton team leader comes up to lap him. Unsettled by the oil haze from the wrecked engine, Schumacher slid wildly off the road, coming through the plunging right-hander onto the start-finish straight. Up to then, he'd been edging ever closer to the McLaren, but that spectacular moment effectively broke his challenge. Prost duly survives to take the checkered flag after what he described as one of his most difficult races in recent history. A quick rub-down, followed by an equally cooling handshake from Senna, prepared the way for an appearance on the podium. Yet elsewhere in the pits, another more private triumph was being celebrated. Michael Andretti had brought his McLaren home in 5th place to score the first ever championship points of his Formula One career. Monaco is the jewel in Grand Prix racing's crown, yet its narrow ribbon of tarmac wending a tortuous path through an avenue of unyielding guardrail represents one of the most precarious challenges of all for the professional Grand Prix driver. Ayrton Senna received a very stark reminder of this reality during the first free practice session when he crashed his McLaren heavily under braking for the tricky Saint-Devote right-hander. Of course, the sun doesn't always shine, even in Monte Carlo. What's more, when it's wet, the surface is like sheet ice. As Schumacher found out. And De Cesaris. And Andretti. Damon Hill was fastest in the patchy, damp conditions, pleasing his mum in the process. Senna shares a word with his girlfriend. And in the Ferrari camps, they get down to some solid thinking. Jean Alesi spun his Ferrari at the chicane. Senna's McLaren got badly off course at Saint-Devote once again, this time confining itself to a spin. Luca Badoer did quite a serious nose and tail job to his Lola Ferrari. Then Senna spun again at the chicane, while Hill apparently duplicated the manoeuvre seconds later. For Prost, however, it was all a bit of a yawn, and pole position duly fell his way yet again. Schumacher appears unhappy with his time,
Must be a 20 high since last
while Barrichello shares his 21st birthday cake with team chief Eddie Jordan as the Brazilian is serenaded in suitable style. Hold together now. As the shadows lengthen, Monaco's character subtly changes and the great and the good get all dressed up to tackle the Principality's other circuit, the party circuit. So, for the first time, Schumacher is on the front row, with former Monaco winner and teammate Patrese in 6th. McLaren test driver Mika Häkkinen may not have been taking part in the Grand Prix, but he managed to show a clean pair of heels to all his rivals in the supporting Porsche Super Cup race. Schumacher looking even more confident than usual as he lined his Benetton up in 2nd place on the starting grid. Prost got the jump off the line, too sharply as things were to transpire, with Senna forcing his way ahead of Hill to take 3rd place as the pack jostled through Saint-Devote for the first time. Further back, Marc Blundell found himself obliged to steer into the escape road. As this replay shows, Prost was judged to have jumped the start. Although Senna was doing well, his teammate Michael Andretti had a distinctly less than rewarding first lap. Going down towards the tight Lowe's hairpin, the American suddenly found his McLaren plunging into the back of a Minardi. Here's Prost playing a 10-second penalty for that false start. But he then compounded his own difficulties by stalling his engine. By the time he finally managed to coax the Renault V10 back into life, he was way down the running order and a lap behind the leading bunch. A pit board now signalled the good news to Schumacher that his Benetton was leading, but a leak of hydraulic fluid over the engine caused the car's gear change and suspension systems to shut down. he eventually rolled to a halt, and marshals were quick to extinguish a momentary engine fire. Berger chased after Hill with great zest, the Austrian determined to wrest second place from the Williams driver. Unfortunately, Gerhard got a little over-optimistic and tried to force his way through on the inside under braking for the Lowe's hairpin. There just wasn't sufficient room. Damon kept his cool. He hadn't allowed his engine to stall and, willed on by wife Georgie, continued to finish second. Berger was out on the spot with broken suspension. Senna lapped Prost in the closing stages on his way to scoring what was a record 6th Monaco Grand Prix victory. Compatriot Christian Fittipaldi, having survived that first lap mauling from Andretti, ensured that it was a double success for Brazil by bringing his Minardi home in an excellent 5th place to claim 2 points. Senna shared his unconcealed delight with his McLaren team colleagues before sharing the congratulations with second and third men, Hill and Alesi, to round off a truly memorable afternoon. And we see it's finally some good news for Ferrari, finishing on the podium for the first time this season. The most traditional aspect of the pre-Canadian Grand Prix festivities is the raft race, held between members of the various 13 teams on the former Olympic rowing basin just behind the confined paddock area at the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. Minardi driver Fabrizio Barbazza demonstrated a streak of self-sufficiency which his modestly financed team would have approved of. Regarded as more obviously fishy by many competing teams was a bulletin indicated that, in the opinion of the FISA technical delegate, active suspension and traction control systems did not conform to the current, never mind any future, technical rules. Alain Prost promptly fired up his Williams, trying to ignore this apparent broadside from the sport's governing body. But the Frenchman was again given a good run for his money in qualifying by Damon Hill, despite a quick spin on the part of the Englishman. Once Prost got into his stride, he kept his record intact by taking his 7th pole position in as many races. Meanwhile, it was all smiles in the Benetton camp with 3rd and 4th fastest times. Jean Alesi celebrated his 29th birthday on a weekend which saw him qualifying his Ferrari a promising 6th. By contrast, things went badly for Ayrton Senna, whose McLaren came back on a salvage truck, causing him to confer with teammate Michael Andretti. Ukyo Katayama still couldn't quite get the hang of his Tyrrell Yamaha and found the guardrails exerting an almost magnetic attraction. Alessandro Zanardi was again out of luck with his Lotus, taking time off for another spin. Problems again with the active suspension system. While Liz Brundle keeps a watchful eye on husband Martin, Carl Wendlinger keeps a watchful eye on his steering wheel for entirely different reasons. And a representative of the American racing scene crossed the border to catch a genuine World Championship event. 2 Williams, 2 Benetton, 2 Ferrari and the fastest McLaren down in 8th. Team personnel clear the grid as Andretti's McLaren is left standing. Schumacher throws his high qualifying position away by fluffing the start and being overtaken by most of the field. Senna is off like a jackrabbit and dives down the outside of Alesi's Ferrari as they negotiate the old pit's hairpin at the end of the opening lap. Wheel to wheel, McLaren and Ferrari sprint for the last S's together, but Senna keeps his nerve and gains a place. Hill led the race initially, only to be passed by Prost in a neat manoeuvre at the hairpin. Damon looks secure in second, but loses a lot of time in a fumbled Williams tyre stop. He dropped back to fourth behind Senna and Schumacher as a result. That leaves Schumacher to haul steadily up onto Senna's tail. Although unknown to the German driver, the McLaren ace has a problem with his engine, intermittently cutting out with increasing frequency. Eventually, Senna's engine cuts out for good, and he inadvertently goes to pull off just as Schumacher draws level, causing a hair-raising moment. Barring mechanical pitfalls, Schumacher is now home and dry in second place. Prost, meanwhile, notches up his fourth win of the season, crossing the line with Christian Fittipaldi's Minardi sharing some of the glory by following in his wheel tracks, just lapped for the second time and in ninth place. Alain's success moves him back into the Drivers' Championship lead for the first time since Kyalami, giving that victory champagne a welcome extra fizz as he shares the podium for the first time with both Hill and Schumacher. So Wendlinger finishes sixth, earning his first championship point of the season, thanks no doubt to his lucky steering wheel. The French Grand Prix returned to Magny-Cours for the third successive year, and Renault was absolutely determined to complete a hat-trick on home soil after Nigel Mansell's victories at the previous two races. Ferrari also demonstrated its intention to become more competitive by recruiting former Peugeot competitions manager Jean Todt as the new sporting director, although his arrival didn't bring luck for Gerhard Berger, who had an off during qualifying. Away from the action on the circuit, Formula One politics dominated the paddock gossip. Williams' Patrick Head and Benetton's Tom Walkinshaw mulled things over together. Bernie Eccleston, Flavio Briatore, Patrick Head and Frank Williams got down to brass tacks, and Briatore also talked to Ferrari's Claudio Lombardi. Ron Dennis and Frank Williams plot strategy together, while Hill and Prost at least find something to smile about. Out on the circuit, Damon's Williams is using ABS braking for the first time, and he duly delivers the first pole position of his career.
I pushed extra hard in the on the final lap because I only had one lap left on that run, and I found a good balance in the car and scrabbled through the chicanes and found a bit more time there, and got a good lap time. And it was a little bit heart in mouth, but that's how it happens when you want to go quickly.
Fellow Renault user Martin Brundle, here talking to Ligier Principles, bags his best ever grid position with third, while Marc Blundell qualified the other Ligier fourth. Senna was not happy in fifth, while Schumacher talks his race engineer through one of his spins. Unusually, Mummy and Daddy Schumacher turned up to watch as well. Eric Comas led Philippe Alliot to the fifth row on the grid, Larousse's best this year, while Fabrizio Barbazza prepared for his last race. And as you can see, the top four spots all held by Renault-powered cars. Really quite exceptional. The local fans turn out in force to cheer their French heroes, while Alain Prost tries to ignore the pressure by chatting to his engineer, David Brown, on the grid. At the start, Hill grabbed an immediate lead, with Prost, Brundle, Blundell and Senna heading the chase. Hill looks confident at the front of the field, but Renault's symmetry is ruined when Blundel's Ligier spears off into the guardrail early on. The Englishman blamed lapped Andrea de Cesares. Hill is the first Williams to come in for tyres, but loses crucial seconds following Andretti's McLaren into the pit lane. And following it out again. Whoops, who waved that Sauber out in front of them both? Now it's Prost's turn for tyres. He gets away cleanly, but Hill comes shooting up onto his tail as they round the first long right-hander. A bit of creative manoeuvring and Alain stays ahead. Ferrari's bad luck continued with Alesi's early retirement. Riccardo Patrese seems set for a top 6 placing until he gets a little too close to Christian Fittipaldi's Minardi, much to the detriment of his Benetton's front end. That calls for an unscheduled stop to get a replacement nose section, dropping Riccardo out of serious contention. Schumacher made a second tyre stop and benefits from the dramatic extra grip afforded by his new tyres. He closes quickly on Senna, who has elected to go through with only a single tyre stop. The Benetton slams round the outside of the McLaren on the left-hander after the pits, and Ayrton, struggling for grip, just has to let him go. Prost wins by a fraction of a second from Hill as the Williams team records its first 1-2 finish of the season.
Coming up in a second.
Great team spirit there, with Hill helping Prost towards a popular win on his home turf. Of course, next up is Silverstone. Let's see if Prost will return the favour. So, halfway through the season, we see Prost is taking a firm lead from Senna. First practice day at Silverstone, and the weather behaves as one would expect, just like Donington Park in fact. Schumacher had warmed up by winning a celebrity cycle race the previous day. But for the moment, Senna's main priority is gloves and tea as he thinks of the Brazilian sunshine. Ron Dennis has a cold coming, while Damon Hill wants action to start, but not for long. During the first practice session, his Williams snaps away from him and he ends up bogged down in the sand trap at Stowe Corner. That certainly wasn't in the script for his home Grand Prix, but even so, Hill's moment looks like small potatoes after Blundel's adventures. Not good for the nerves, as Mark admits later. Senna returns to the pits to keep his powder dry. Pierluigi Martini, the Minardi's team replacement for Barbazza, goes out to get back into the swing of Formula One. Unfortunately, as he proves, he's still a bit rusty, with a painful spin into the barrier at Woodcote. Alan Prost doesn't normally like the rain, but this time he was the fastest of them all. Tyrrell introduced their new 021 and maybe wished they hadn't, while Lotus directors Peter Wright and Peter Collins finally had something to smile about. The car was fast again, and Johnny Herbert could even afford to dream. Michael Schumacher was busier. Undaunted, he ran back and took over his teammate Riccardo Patrese Benetton, in which he improved dramatically to qualify third behind the all-Williams battle for pole position. Senna didn't look too happy, but Hill raised a cheer from the crowd by taking what looked like the second pole of his career in as many weeks. Georgie, of course, overjoyed. But a few seconds later, Prost spoiled the party, with a time just a fraction quicker, stealing back pole position in the final moments of the session. Race morning sees Damon Hill fated by the sort of attention bestowed on Nigel Mansell only 12 months earlier. And the Londoner duly rewards his fans by making a quick getaway to lead the sprint down to Klopp's Corner, with Senna again starting superbly, slingshotting through to ease second place from Prost. Meanwhile, Michael Andretti taxed the McLaren team's reserves of patience even further. As Hill pulls clear, Senna tries every trick in the book and a few more to keep Prost behind. By the time Prost finally makes it through, Hill's lead has opened to over 8 seconds. Now Schumacher has his hands full with Senna. Benetton's boss, Fabio Briatore, clearly not impressed. But Michael eventually makes it and quickly pulls away from the McLaren. Hill continues to lead, but Prost is closing all the time. Then, Luca Badoer's Lola Ferrari stops at Woodcote, and out came the safety car, bunching up the pack again. Damon springs ahead at the restart and looks unstoppable. But an ominous telltale plume of smoke signals the end of his afternoon's work. For Georgie, it was all too much. The way was clear for Prost to take his 6th win of the season, the 50th of his distinguished career. Schumacher finished second, but Senna, who appears to suffer an aversion to Silverstone, ground to a halt on the last lap for the 3rd consecutive year. That drops him to 5th in the final order, allowing Formula One's all-time veteran Riccardo Patrese to join Prost and Schumacher on the rostrum for the first time this season.
For the rest of this year, notwithstanding what happened at the World Council and may happen at the Court of Appeal, the teams have agreed to ask the FISA to allow them to run with cars in the same configuration that they've been running the whole year.
Some, like Derek Warwick, found their cars less stable than the regulations, but the fans were out for Schumacher, and that's all that seemed to matter in Hockenheim. The Williams drivers were having a busy time. Prost slid off up an escape road. Hill spun, once at the Ostkurve chicane, then again at the tight infield hairpin. For this, he blamed Michele Alboreto and paid a visit to the Scuderia Italia garage, where he gave the Italian a piece of his mind. Alboreto was not impressed. In a weekend of overdriving, Luca Badawa ripped a couple of wheels from his Lola. Jean Alesi spun his Ferrari, and Gerhard Berger smashed up his pretty comprehensively when he slammed into the tyre barriers at the chicane. Even Senna took a trip up a chicane escape road. Schumacher gives his team manager a progress report, while Blundell ensured a third-row place for Ligier. And footwork boss Jack Oliver reflects the views of his driver Aguri Suzuki. On the race morning, Derek Warwick reminded everyone that motor racing is dangerous, but that Formula One cars are remarkably safe today. Helped from the wreck by Alesi and Berger, the Englishman emerged unhurt, and after a check-up in the Heidelberg hospital, he bravely elected to take the start in the spare footwork. On the morning, the Schumacher fans were out in force. Hill again got the jump on Prost to lead from the start. Schumacher keeping those fans happy by taking second. Senna tried to muscle past Prost, but he didn't make it, spun out and restarted from dead last. Faced with the sight of Brundle spinning Ligier in his mirrors, Prost elected to steer up the escape road at the Ostkurve chicane, followed almost involuntarily by the Englishman. Senna was steadily making up ground. But Michael Andretti's season continued its nightmarish course after a bumping match with Berger's Ferrari. Prost overtook Schumacher for second place. But both footworks managed to trip over each other, sending Suzuki and Warwick autocrossing off together onto the infield. Prost overtook Hill to lead on lap 8. Only to be called in for his second stop-go penalty of the year for missing that chicane on the opening lap. That put Hill back into the lead again, with Schumacher a strong second. Behind the leaders, a battle between Blundell in the Ligier and Berger's Ferrari raged with a ferocious intensity. The two cars running wheel to wheel on the straights, perhaps too close at times, at almost 200 miles per hour. Prost had regained second place from Schumacher when the Benetton driver made his first tyre stop on lap 16. But just when it seemed as though Hill was going to score his first Grand Prix victory, 31 years to the race since his father had won the German Grand Prix, a rear tyre lost pressure, overheated and disintegrated. First, Berger's Ferrari surged past then Prost Williams, the Frenchman taking his 7th win of the season. As Alain celebrated his latest step towards a 4th World Championship, Schumacher and Blundell were promoted up onto the podium, and both were delighted. Senna, who qualified 4th, holds that position, moving up 1 place from his last race.
I've been unlucky in the last couple of races, I think, and it can't keep happening. That sort of thing can't keep happening. So I have to keep on producing the performance, and hopefully the luck will change and go my way.
And so to the Hungarian Grand Prix, where the tight, challenging circuit near Budapest put a premium on aerodynamic downforce. Prost had a nail-biting moment in practice with the spin at the first tricky downhill corner after the pits. But Hill was in his customary confident mood from the outset at the wheel of the other Williams Renault. Schumacher achieved his regular 3rd spot, while Senna took a very poor 4th. Pierluigi Martini was getting the hang of his Minardi and qualified considerably faster than teammate Christian Fittipaldi. The Brazilian later took a shunt into the barrier. Just the sort of thing Ferrari driver Gerhard Berger was going out of his way to avoid, suffering as he was with a painful build-up of fluid on his left elbow. As Tyrrell driver Andrea de Cesares considered his prospects, Michael Andretti seemed in a more relaxed mood. Riccardo Patrese was well in the groove with his Benetton, qualifying 5th for what promised to be his best race of the year. Prost was too delicate with the throttle pedal and stalled his Williams Renault engine at the start of the parade lap. That meant he had to start at the back of the grid. Hill had an unchallenged run down to the first corner in the lead. Schumacher also made a great getaway, arriving at the first turn in 2nd place, only to run wide and be overtaken by several key rivals. Watch Barrichello leave the track here in the background. So it's a half day for the Brazilian. Schumacher made up for his earlier mistake by overtaking Berger. But then lost more valuable time with a spin. Meanwhile, Prost was carving his way steadily through the field, even though all hopes of victory were long gone from his mind. It was a bad day for McLaren, with Andretti retiring first with a throttle linkage failure. Then Senna stopped out on the circuit with a similar mechanical problem. Prost's day was completely ruined when he had to stop for 7 laps to fix a cracked rear wing support on his Williams. Alesi had a frightening high-speed departure from the circuit, testing the strength of the guardrail following a brush with Fittipaldi's Minardi. John emerged shaken, but not stirred. A few laps later, a broken engine ended the race for Schumacher. The battle for 4th place raged for much of the race between Derek Warwick's Footwork, Martin Brundle's Ligier and Pierluigi Martini's Minardi. Berger, however, reckoned a second stop for tyres was the best strategy for this gruelling race. Martini lost concentration, control and a place in the top 6 with a spin into the barrier. While Berger wasn't averse to a bit of roughhousing it with Brundle when he forced his way past Ligier, bending the French car's steering arm in the process. But the day belonged to Hill, who had raced throughout with the pressure of no pressure at all, kept his concentration and driven into the history books as the first ever second-generation member of a Grand Prix winning family. Prost, who finished a distant 12th, was quick to congratulate his teammate, who was joined on the podium by runner-up Patrese and third-place man Berger. Practice for the Belgian Grand Prix began on a spectacular note. Alessandro Zanardi crashed his Lotus on the tricky Eau Rouge corner. The McLarens of Andretti and Senna arrived first to the crash site. Senna too fast for comfort. Zanardi's teammate, Johnny Herbert, must have felt uneasy in the cockpit as he watched the aftermath of the shunt.
Seen flags? Yeah, I saw. And I slowed down, but I didn't slow down enough. I didn't expect to have a full block circuit.
When practice resumed, Philippe Alliot dumped his LaRousse Lamborghini into the guardrail at almost the same spot. The accidents prompted numerous discussions in the pit lane. Jean Alesi managed to qualify his Ferrari in 4th place, but Gerhard Berger struggled. First his Ferrari caught fire in the pit lane, then it stopped out on the circuit. Riccardo Patrese seemed rather disappointed with 8th place on the grid, but both Aguri Suzuki and birthday boy Derek Warwick were encouraged by the strong performance of their footwork Mugens on this very fast circuit, qualifying 6th and 7th respectively. Jordan driver Thierry Boutsen ended his 10-year career in Formula One with this race. For Schumacher, the start was a disaster as he bogged down badly again and was 9th into the first corner from 3rd on the grid. Prost led Senna from the start with Hill in 3rd place. But Damon slipstreamed past the McLaren on the long haul up to the Les Combes corner to take over 2nd place. Boutsen retired early. And Schumacher was soon overtaking Alesi as the Italian car slowed. Its driver so worried about its lurid high-speed handling that he soon pulled off. Schumacher's climb through the field was not aided by an inhospitable lunge from Senna, who moved across and forced the Benetton driver to put 2 wheels on the grass as the McLaren came out of the pit lane exit. But Schumacher kept his foot firmly on the throttle and just squeezed by into 3rd place. Prost by now was only narrowly leading Hill after Damon had caught up in heavy traffic. When Alain came in to change tyres, he was delayed by a sticking wheel nut. That was just enough to ensure that Hill squeezed ahead into the lead as the Frenchman's Williams nosed out from the pit. Before Prost could settle back into a fast enough rhythm, Schumacher slithered past, all wheels locked to take second place. Now it was all down to whether the German star could eat into Hill's advantage. But Damon kept his head perfectly to score his second Grand Prix victory. So after an unlucky start to the season, Hill really seemed to be hitting his stride, and Schumacher obviously happy to have taken that second from Prost at the end of the race. Italy is as passionate about its soccer as its motor racing, and the pre-race match attracted such skillful players as Hill, Schumacher and Patrese. Jordan had close-cropped Italian Marco Apicello on hand as partner to Barrichello, but the newcomer didn't take long to spin at the second Lesmo right-hander. Pedro Lamy replaced the still unfit Zanardi in Lotus, but he too probed the limits of his new mount with a quick pirouette at the Variante Ascari. Gerhard Berger was determined to do his best for Ferrari's home fans, whose allegiance is firmly and publicly proclaimed from the spectators' enclosure. Jean Alesi duly delivered the goods with a splendid third qualifying time, while Senna thought it wise to keep his fans behind bars. Schumacher was his irrepressibly happy self, even though his Benetton seemed to be shedding a few tears from its radiator overflow. Alain Prost needed another win to clinch his fourth championship title and duly bagged his 12th pole position in 13 races. But watch this.
I didn't understand in which way he was overtake me, and when I was moving to the left, he arrived on the left. I'm moving back to on the right, and he spun. He crashed behind me, on the front of me, and that was it was a big misunderstanding.
But despite that little bump, Alesi took the third spot on the grid, and Berger held sixth. For Michael Andretti, the Italian Grand Prix was destined to mark the end of his Formula One adventure, although neither he nor the McLaren team was admitting it at the time. At the start, Prost got away cleanly in the lead, but Senna proved too optimistic in trying to pass Hill as they braked for the first corner. Hill stuck to his line, and Senna found himself bouncing over the Englishman's left rear wheel onto the infield. Further back in the pack, both footworks, the two Jordans and Lato Sauber all managed to get themselves tangled up in a multiple pile-up and went no further. Suzuki and Warwick walked away, happily unhurt, as Prost settled down to lead comfortably from Alesi and Schumacher in the opening stages. It didn't take long for Schumacher to pass Alesi for second place. Meanwhile, Senna was pounding back into contention, chasing Brundle's Ligier for 8th place. Unfortunately, Ayrton got a little too close. Hill recovered to overtake Alesi. Promoted to 2nd place when Schumacher's engine expired. Even after his planned stop for tyres, Prost retained his lead over his teammate, who had still to make his stop. It looked as though the title destiny had been settled when Prost's engine kicked the bucket. Hill, who followed closely, was handed his 3rd Grand Prix win in a row. On the run into the checkered flag, Christian Fittipaldi earned the distinction of Accident of the Year, but still crossed the line unhurt. Alesi delighted the fiercely partisan crowd with a splendid 2nd place, while Andretti claimed his first podium finish with 3rd place. Within days, the American would announce that he planned to return to IndyCars in 1994 and relinquished his seat in the McLaren squad for the 3 remaining races of the season.
Cette petite conférence de presse est donc destinée à vous annoncer que je ne courrai plus en Formule 1 après le Grand Prix d'Adélaïde.
The final European round of the championship was dominated by Alain Prost's decision to retire at the end of the season, opening the way for Ayrton Senna to leave McLaren and join Williams for 94. Alain continued to try hard in qualifying, too hard on this occasion. Hill looked thoughtful in the pits, but was assertive out on the circuit, where he produced the 2nd pole position of his freshman year. Ayrton Senna offered some advice to his new teammate Mika Hakkinen, Andretti's successor in the McLaren lineup. And he got a good close-up of the Flying Finn's driving style as they ran in close company out on the circuit. Alesi was attacking as usual with the Ferrari, while Michael Schumacher managed to raise a smile, despite major handling problems with his Benetton, which caused him to spin and spin and spin again. Emanuele Naspetti was the latest newcomer to sample a Jordan, while the persistently hopeless Scuderia Italia's Lola Ferraris were contesting their last race of the season. And quite a surprise after the qualifying practice to see Hakkinen taking the 3rd spot in his first Formula 1 race of 1993. Hill took a leaf out of Prost's book and stalled at the start of the parade lap, consigning himself to the back of the grid. At the start, Häkkinen got a little over-exuberant in his private battle with Prost on the sprint to the first corner, opening the door for Alesi to lunge round the outside and push his Ferrari into the lead. Senna soon passed Häkkinen for second place and settled down to chase Alesi, whose Ferrari was dramatically fast in a straight line. Hill tried desperately to make up for lost time. Ayrton's challenge ended when his engine went belly up. And Prost swept by into the lead as Alesi and Häkkinen made their pit stops together. Almost tripping over each other as they battled on their return to the circuit. You can really sense the urgency Häkkinen feels in trying to assert himself in his first race. Prost's tyre stop handed the lead to Schumacher's Benetton, which had been one of the first to change tyres, the German driver planning on making a second tyre change later in the race. Häkkinen got it terribly wrong through the right hand onto the start-finish straight, and his McLaren race debut ended in tears. But that was small beer compared with Berger, who lost his Ferrari over a bump at the exit of the pit lane. How Warwick missed him remains one of the great mysteries of modern times. Prost pulled every trick in the book to deal with Schumacher's Benetton in the closing stages, but Michael abandoned his idea of a second tyre change and hung on out there to score the second win of his career. But second place was good enough to clinch Prost's fourth World Championship, a record only matched by 5-time winner Juan Manuel Fangio back in the 1950s. And as we can see, Hill managed to climb back to third place after a terrible beginning. The Japanese Grand Prix saw the appearance of another Jordan newcomer, Ulsterman Eddie Irvine. Other new faces included local hero Toshio Suzuki replacing Philippe Alliot in the Larousse, and Jean-Marc Gounon taking over from Christian Fittipaldi in the Minardi squad. Senna offered some advice to Lotus new boy Pedro Lamy, while in the Williams camp, Prost chilled out as Hill prepared for action. Damon set fastest qualifying time, then blotted his copybook with a spin, and was pushed back to 6th on the grid by the end of the qualifying. De Cesaris shunting the Tyrrell Yamaha is no longer news. as the expressions on the faces of Ken Tyrrell and team manager Rupert Mannering indicate. Jean Alesi initially spun his Ferrari at the first corner after the pits, but then got back out there to do the job properly. Ayrton Senna was really fired up and qualified on the front row alongside Prost. The Frenchman preferring to watch on TV after grabbing another pole position. So Häkkinen doing well to secure the third spot again, and Hill, if he doesn't stall, is much better off than he was in the last race. Senna looked confident from the outset as he lined up on the grid. As the starting light turned green, Prost was moving first, but Ayrton pulled level and just squeezed ahead as they arrived at the first corner. Eddie Irvine cheekily ran right round the outside of the pack to take 5th place from Schumacher's Benetton, much to the German surprise. Senna settled down to lead commandingly from Prost and Häkkinen, while Hill shaped up to pass Schumacher. As Hill tried to pass Berger, Schumacher came too close, with inevitable results. Senna made an early tyre stop, but managed to surge past Prost Williams again as the track was suddenly doused by a heavy rain shower. Hill made an early switch back to slicks, but came under intense pressure for 6th place from Irvine, who boldly unlapped himself from Senna's McLaren, which led to Senna thumping him after the race. An oil leak onto a rear tyre pitched Patrace's Benetton into a huge shunt, while Irvine clinched the final point of the afternoon by nudging Warwick's footwork out of 6th place. Pedro Lami's Lotus also crashed heavily when the active suspension failed and threw him off the road. The day ended with Senna scoring his 4th win of the season for McLaren after a brilliant performance. Ron Dennis was smiling again. Häkkinen scoring his first ever podium finish in 3rd place. And there's Eddie Irvine, blissfully unaware that he's about to eat one of Senna's famous knuckle sandwiches. The Australian Grand Prix in Adelaide is traditionally a popular finale to the World Championship year. En route, Prost got some practice at the controls of a DC-10, preparing for a new job perhaps. Senna looks on in admiration. Visa medical delegate Professor Watkins went to work with a grin as De Cesaris wondered where he should spin off this weekend. Berger prepared for action as Alesi wiped his spit guard. And Schumacher hammed it up for the camera. Senna offered a warning finger as Eddie Irvine emerged from hiding. And De Cesaris makes his first decision of the weekend. But Prost has seen it all before. Out on the circuit, there was an end-of-term atmosphere. Senna parted company with Marlborough after a 6-year association, but that didn't stop him scoring his first pole of the season. And he already had plans for his new Williams teammate.
I think I gotta have a word with Frank for some team orders for tomorrow.
At the start, Senna was emotionally charged up, but still got the better of the two Williams. Further back in the pack, the traffic was too tightly packed, and Pedro Lami's Lotus was the first casualty of the afternoon. Senna pulled away relentlessly in the early stages, pursued by the Williams duo. But Eddie Irvine makes sure he won't be a problem for anyone this time. Hill comes under pressure from Schumacher in the early stages before making the first of 2 tyre stops. Hakkinen boldly got ahead of the Englishman's Williams. Schumacher's excellent run came to a premature end with engine failure, while Hakkinen was now under pressure from Hill. A locking brake on the McLaren spells long-term trouble, and Damon just managed to get back ahead. Derek Warwick was battling the after effects of a heavy cold, but he didn't let this sideways trip down the curb get him down. Hakkinen wasn't quite as lucky. JJ Leto ended his season on a high note. In the closing stages, Hill tried to wrest second place from Prost, but didn't quite make it. He eventually recovered and was very lucky to be missed by Brundle's Ligier. So Senna signed off for McLaren with his 5th win of the season, and Prost only 2nd in the final race of his distinguished career. Happily, on the rostrum, past differences were forgotten, as Senna invited his teammates past and future to join him on top of the world. So in a year when Prost won an historic Ford title and retired, and Senna dominated the year before taking his place with Williams, I'll leave you now with the final standings of 1993.